The church bells tolled softly across the misty valley, their echoes fading into the gray morning air. Inside the small stone chapel, rows of villagers gathered, whispering behind gloved hands. Their eyes darted toward the front where the bride stood, motionless, her head bowed, her face hidden beneath layers of delicate lace. Beneath that veil was Ilara, a girl no one thought would ever stand at an altar, least of all in a nobleman's house. Ilara's hands trembled inside her worn gloves. The bouquet of white lilies quivered in her grip, and she prayed no one could see how she shook. The veil shielded her from their stares, but she could still feel them, piercing, judgmental, cruel. She had lived with those stares her whole life. Ever since the fire when she was a child, the one that had left a long, silvery burn across her cheek and jaw, she had been the scarred girl, the one mothers warned their sons not to look at too long. Her father, once a farmer with good land, had gambled away everything, his crops, his cattle, even the roof over their heads. In desperation, he'd offered Ilara's hand to Lord Adrian Hale, a man twice her age and far above her station. The deal had been simple. The Lord would forgive the debt, and in return Ilara would become his wife. No one asked her what she wanted. No one ever had. Now, as the priest's words filled the air, Ilara's thoughts drifted between dread and disbelief. Her world had been small and hard, gray fields, harsh winters, and whispers behind every door. She had never imagined a grand house or silk gowns or a husband whose voice could silence a room. Yet here she was, promised to a man she had never even spoken to. She could sense him beside her. Lord Adrian Hale, the man who had agreed to take her as his bride. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in silence. She dared not look at him, but she could feel the warmth of his body near hers. The story said he was a cold man, one who smiled rarely, spoke little, and had buried a wife years ago. A man who cared for land, not people. Still, as he stood beside her now, he didn't seem cruel, only distant. The priest's voice faded into a low murmur as Ilara's thoughts raced. When he sees me, he'll turn away. He'll regret this. He'll hate me. Her heart pounded. She could almost feel the weight of her scar beneath the lace, the ghost of that childhood pain that had marked not just her face but her soul. She wanted to run, to escape before he saw the truth. But where would she go? Her father had already spent the dowry. Her name was tied to this man now, forever. When the ceremony ended, the crowd rose, murmuring blessings that didn't sound sincere. Ilara kept her head low as Adrian placed a ring on her finger, a band of gold so bright it hurt to look at. His hand was steady, firm but gentle. He didn't flinch from touching her. That small gesture, though simple, startled her. No one touched her without hesitation. As the priest declared them husband and wife, a wave of silence swept through the chapel. Ilara knew what came next, the moment he would lift her veil. The thought made her throat tighten. She whispered almost desperately, "Please, not now." To her surprise, Adrian paused. His gaze lingered on her, curious but kind. Then, with a respectful nod, he lowered his hand and said quietly so only she could hear, "Then we'll wait." The crowd erupted in confused whispers, but Ilara's breath caught. For the first time, someone had listened. Beneath the veil, tears welled in her eyes. Not of shame this time, but of something unfamiliar. Perhaps it was hope. That single act of mercy, small and silent, would become the moment her heart began to change. The carriage wheels rolled over the gravel path, their rhythmic clatter echoing through the stillness of the countryside. Inside, Ilara sat stiffly, her veil still lowered, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her sat her new husband, Lord Adrian Hale, the man she now owed her future to. He hadn't spoken since they left the chapel. His silence wasn't cold but measured, as though words were things to be used sparingly. Ilara could feel his gaze occasionally drift toward her, but she didn't lift her eyes. She kept her face turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, hiding behind the lace that separated them like a curtain between two worlds. The road wound upward toward the Hale estate, a sprawling manor surrounded by endless green hills. Ilara had heard stories of it since she was a child. To her, it had always sounded like something from a fairy tale, a place she'd never see except in dreams. Yet now it would be her home. She should have felt gratitude, perhaps even wonder. But all she felt was dread. Lord Hale broke the silence first. His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to raise it. "You may remove your veil if it troubles you," he said gently. "No one here will judge you." Alara flinched at the offer, her fingers gripping the edge of her gown. I prefer to keep it," she whispered. He didn't press her. Instead, she heard him exhale softly and turn his gaze toward the rain-soaked hills. The silence that followed was strangely comforting. He did not question her, nor demand anything. When they arrived at the manor, the servants lined up along the grand staircase, their expressions carefully neutral. They had expected a noblewoman of beauty and poise, not a nervous girl in a plain gown hiding behind a veil. Alara could feel their eyes burning through the lace as Adrian introduced her. "This is Lady Alara Hale. You will treat her with the same respect you show me." His tone left no room for argument. The servants bowed, murmuring their greetings. Alara's throat tightened. No one had ever defended her before, not even her father. As the evening settled in, Adrian led her through the manor's endless halls. The portraits of his ancestors loomed from the walls, their painted eyes following her every step. It was a cold, vast place, so quiet that her footsteps sounded like intrusions. He showed her to her chamber, a room far grander than anything she had known. Soft carpets, a blazing hearth, and a canopy bed draped in white linen. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "If you need anything, speak to Mrs. Donnelly, the housekeeper. She'll see to it." Alara hesitated, unsure how to reply. He stood in the doorway, a tall figure framed by the firelight. His face was solemn, but not unkind. There was something in his eyes, weariness perhaps, or loneliness. She wondered if he had married her out of duty, or if, like her, he had been cornered by fate. Before he left, he paused. "You needn't fear me," he said softly. "This house is yours now. You're safe here. Safe." The word lingered long after he was gone. Alara sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the fire. She wanted to believe him, but her heart didn't know how. Safety was a luxury she had never known. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills and the rain began to pour harder. Alone in her new room, Alara lifted her veil slightly, feeling the fire's warmth against her skin. In the flickering light, her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. Half beauty, half scar. She quickly turned away. He had said she was safe, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The day he would see her face and decide if his kindness would remain. The manor had grown quiet by the time Alara was led to her chamber. The servants had withdrawn, the corridors darkened, and only the soft crackle of the fire kept her company. Still dressed in her wedding gown, she sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her fingers together until they ached. Every creak in the floorboards made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the window made her heart race. She wasn't afraid of the storm outside. It was the man she now called husband that frightened her most. Not because of cruelty, he had shown her none, but because she didn't understand him. He had said so little, yet his eyes seemed to see too much. A gentle knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lord Adrian Hale stepped inside, his presence filling the room. He had changed from his formal attire, dressed now in a simple dark shirt and trousers. The light from the fire danced across his features, strong, dignified, but touched by a quiet sorrow that she couldn't name. "I hope you're settling in," he said softly, stopping a few feet from her. "Yes, my lord," she murmured, keeping her head lowered. Her veil still covered her face, even though her hair had begun to loosen beneath it. He hesitated, watching her for a long moment. Then in a voice so calm it almost sounded like a lullaby, he asked, "May I see your face, Alara?" Her breath caught. The question she had been dreading had come. Panic flooded her chest. She shook her head quickly, the veil trembling with the motion. "Please," she whispered. "I'd rather you didn't." He took a slow step closer, but did not touch her. His gaze softened, the authority in his voice replaced with quiet understanding. "You think I'll be frightened," he said, more as a statement than a question. She didn't answer. "I'm not," he continued. "But I won't ask again tonight." The unexpected gentleness in his tone broke something in her. She had braced herself for rejection, for the disgust she'd seen in others' eyes since childhood. Instead, there was only patience. She dared to lift her head slightly, still hidden, and whispered, "Why? Why would you wait?" Adrian's expression didn't waver. "Because trust cannot be demanded," he said. It's given, when it's ready. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, and the scent of wood smoke filled the air. Ilara's heart beat so loudly she feared he might hear it. Finally, he turned slightly as though to give her space. "If you wish to rest, I'll stay in the adjoining room tonight," he said. "You have my word. You will not be disturbed." He reached for one of the candles on the mantel, its light flickering as he lifted it. Before leaving, he looked back at her one last time. His eyes met hers through the veil, and in them she saw no pity, only a strange, quiet warmth that unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. "Good night, Lady Hale," he said gently. "Good night," she whispered back, her voice trembling. When the door closed behind him, Ilara let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her veil felt suddenly heavier, as if it were a shield and a prison all at once. She touched the thin fabric with trembling fingers, thinking of his words. Trust cannot be demanded. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever given her time to breathe, to choose, to simply exist without judgment. She lay down, still in her gown, her mind a storm of confusion. He hadn't tried to see her face, hadn't looked at her like a burden or a bargain. Instead, he had left her with something far more dangerous than fear. He had left her with hope. Days passed quietly within the grand stone walls of Hale Manor. To the servants, Lord Adrian and Lady Ilara were a mystery, a newlywed couple who shared meals and pleasantries but never laughter, never intimacy. The manor's corridors, wide and echoing, seemed to mirror the distance between them. Ilara rose early each morning, long before the sun touched the hills. She kept her veil close whenever she left her chamber, its light fabric becoming as familiar as her own skin. She tended the manor's herb garden behind the kitchen, where the servants seldom ventured. There, surrounded by lavender and rosemary, she found a fragile peace. The first time Adrian saw her there, he had come quietly, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Ilara froze, her hand stilling over a pot of mint. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, stopping several paces away. "I was told you've taken over the gardens." Ilara bowed her head slightly. "Yes, my lord. The herbs were overgrown. I thought I might make use of them." He studied her for a moment. "You know their uses?" "My mother taught me," she murmured, before she passed. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, recognition, perhaps even admiration, but he said nothing more. He only nodded and walked away, leaving her alone once again. That was how it was between them. Quiet exchanges, never confrontational, never close. And yet, beneath that silence, something subtle was shifting. At dinner, she began to notice the small things he did without speaking of them. How he would wait for her to sit first before taking his place, or how he'd subtly redirect conversation if a servant mentioned gossip from the village. He treated her not as a fragile charity, but as someone to be respected. It unsettled her, this courtesy. She had lived her whole life expecting cruelty. One evening, as rain drummed against the windows, she found herself standing in the manor's library. The scent of parchment and old ink filled the air. She traced her fingers along the shelves, marveling at the rows of books she could barely read. Adrian entered quietly, holding a ledger under his arm. "You enjoy books?" he asked. She startled, nearly dropping the one she held. "I only sometimes," she said, blushing beneath her veil. "I like the way they smell." He smiled faintly. It was the first time she had seen such softness in him. "A practical kind of fondness," he said. "I share it." For a moment, the air between them warmed. She dared to ask, "Do you read often?" "Every night," he replied. "It keeps the ghosts quiet." Her breath caught. "You have ghosts?" He didn't answer directly. His gaze drifted toward the fire. "We all do," he said quietly. "Some just wear different faces." The words lingered, heavy and true. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, he closed the ledger and excused himself. Yet that night, when she returned to her chamber, she found a book resting on her nightstand, a worn volume of poems with a note tucked inside, "For when the world feels too heavy." Her hands trembled as she traced the ink. No one had ever given her a gift before. Over the following weeks, the silence between them softened into something like companionship. They shared quiet dinners, exchanged brief smiles in the garden, and even spoke about trivial things, the weather, the crops, the stubborn horse that refused to obey anyone but Adrian. But though kindness began to grow, a wall still stood between them. built not from mistrust but from fear. Her veil remained, and he never asked to lift it again. Yet sometimes, when she caught him watching her from across the courtyard, she wondered what he saw in a woman who refused to be seen, and deep within her heart, a thought she dared not voice began to bloom. Perhaps he sees me even through the veil. The storm came suddenly, rolling across the valley like an angry beast. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of ash, and the wind tore through the trees around Hale Manor with a wild, unrelenting cry. The servants rushed to shutter the windows and bring the animals into the stables. Ilara, who had been gathering herbs in the garden, hurried back toward the manor, her skirts heavy with rain and her veil clinging to her face. She had almost reached the door when she heard a cry, a child's cry, echoing through the storm. Her heart froze. It came from the riverbank beyond the orchard. Without thinking, she turned and ran. The rain blinded her, soaking her to the bone as she stumbled down the muddy path. Near the river, she saw him, Thomas, the gardener's little boy, clinging to a fallen tree half submerged in the rising current. "Hold on," she shouted, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The boy's tiny fingers slipped. Without hesitation, Ilara waded into the water, the cold biting into her skin. Her veil tangled around her, heavy and suffocating, but she didn't stop. Each step was a battle against the rushing current, her boots sinking into the mud. When she finally reached him, she grabbed his arm and pulled with all her strength. A wave struck them both, and her veil tore away, carried downstream by the storm. She gasped, but there was no time to think, only to save the boy. With a final effort, she pushed him toward the riverbank, where a stable hand rushed to pull him to safety. When they were both out of the water, Ilara collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping for breath. The world around her blurred, and through the sheets of rain she saw a dark figure running toward her. Ilara, it was Adrian. He dropped to his knees beside her, his clothes drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands searching her arms for injuries. She shook her head weakly. "The boy, he's safe." He looked toward the stable hand, who nodded, holding the shivering child close. Relief flashed across Adrian's face, but when his gaze returned to Ilara, it froze. Her veil was gone. The scar, long, pale, and uneven, was exposed under the storm's relentless downpour. Her hair clung to her face, and her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The rain softened, the wind faded, and the only sound was her trembling breath. Then she did what she had always done. She lowered her head in shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for you to see. I know it's ugly, I know—" "Stop." His voice was low but firm. He lifted his hand, hesitant at first, then gently tilted her chin upward until she met his eyes. There was no disgust there, no pity, only a deep, quiet tenderness. "Ilara," he said softly, "you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to be kind," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's true." His thumb brushed lightly against her cheek, tracing the scar as if it were something precious, not something broken. "You saved a child's life without a thought for yourself. There's nothing ugly about courage." The words cut through her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, she didn't look away. Rain still poured around them, but she barely felt it. All the fear, all the years of hiding seemed to wash away with the water that streamed down her face. Adrian's eyes never left hers, steady and certain, anchoring her in a way nothing ever had. In that moment, the veil that had separated them, not just the fabric but the silence, the shame. The distance was gone forever, and beneath the storm something new was born, not out of duty, but out of truth. The morning after the storm dawned calm and golden. Sunlight poured through the manor windows, painting the wet earth outside in a shimmer of gold. Ilara woke to the gentle sound of birds, her body aching but her heart lighter than it had ever been. For the first time since her wedding, she felt no need to reach for her veil. She stood before the mirror, her reflection clear in the early light. The scar that had once felt like a curse no longer frightened her. It was part of her, proof that she had survived fire, cruelty, and fear. Adrian's words echoed softly in her mind. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Tears welled in her eyes. But they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release. When she stepped out of her chamber, the servants froze in surprise. It was the first time any of them had seen her unveiled. Some looked away in discomfort. Others stared, unsure how to react. But before the whispers could begin, Lord Adrian appeared at the end of the corridor. He walked toward her with calm purpose, his gaze never leaving hers. When he reached her side, he offered his arm. "Breakfast?" he asked simply, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. For a moment she hesitated, then she took his arm. The gesture sent a quiet ripple through the manor. The servants lowered their heads, but this time not out of pity, out of respect. At the breakfast table, Adrian spoke lightly, almost teasingly, about the chaos of the storm and the repairs needed on the west roof. His voice was steady and kind, allowing Alara space to breathe. She smiled once, a shy, fleeting smile, but when she did, Adrian's heart tightened. It was a smile worth every storm. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life at Hale Manor began to change. Alara spent more time among the servants, teaching the cook how to use herbs for healing and flavor. She helped the stable hands care for the horses and tended the village children who came for medicine when they were ill. Word spread quickly through the valley of the new Lady Hale, the gentle woman who smiled without pride, who listened, who cared. The villagers who once whispered about her scars began to bow in gratitude when they passed her in the marketplace. The children, curious and fearless, would run up to her asking for stories about flowers or stars. One little girl even reached up and touched her cheek. "It looks like a moon," she said, giggling. Alara laughed for the first time in years, a real, unguarded laugh. That evening, she found Adrian in his study, surrounded by maps and ledgers. He looked up as she entered. "You've been busy," he said with a smile. "So have you," she replied softly, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He shrugged. "A lord's duties never end." Without thinking, she stepped forward and placed a small pouch of dried lavender on his desk. "For rest," she said. "Boil it in water before bed. It helps quiet the mind." His smile deepened. "You're taking care of me now?" "Perhaps," she said, meeting his gaze for the first time without fear. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly between them, the air filled with unspoken warmth. Then Adrian rose, walked to her, and said quietly, "I don't think I ever thanked you." "For what?" "For saving that boy," he said. "And for saving me from a life of silence." Her breath caught. "You were never silent," she whispered. "You just needed someone to listen." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I hope you'll keep listening," he said. Alara smiled. "Only if you keep talking." For the first time, they both laughed, softly, freely. And in that laughter, the walls that had once separated them finally crumbled. The veil was gone, not just from her face, but from her heart. She was no longer the frightened girl who hid from mirrors. She was Lady Alara Hale, strong, seen, and deeply loved. Autumn came early that year, cloaking Hale Manor in golden fire. The harvest was abundant, and the villagers celebrated under banners of crimson leaves. Alara stood beside Adrian, greeting the townsfolk as they offered thanks for her healing herbs and his generosity. It was a season of peace, one that felt like a new beginning. But peace, Alara had learned, was fragile. One afternoon, as the festival wound down and the air filled with laughter, a carriage appeared at the edge of the village road. Its arrival was unexpected, its black paint dulled by dust and travel. When the door opened, Alara's heart stopped. The man who stepped out was thinner than she remembered, his clothes threadbare, his eyes sharp with resentment. Her father. "Hello, daughter," he said, his voice thick with drink. "You've done well for yourself." Alara froze where she stood. It had been more than a year since she had seen him, since the day he sold her into marriage to clear his debts. Seeing him now, all the old fear rushed back, but she was not the same timid girl he once commanded. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I came to see my little girl," he sneered, "and maybe remind her of where she came from." His gaze slid toward Adrian, who had stepped beside her, his expression unreadable. "Lord Hale, I presume. You've been good to her, I hope. Better than she deserves." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You will speak to my wife with respect." Her father laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "Your wife? Do you even know who you married? Do you know the things people said about her? That she hid her face for a reason?" The words cut deep, and though they no longer had the same power as before, they still stung. Adrian stepped forward, his presence alone enough to silence the whispers gathering nearby. "You'll leave now," Adrian said evenly. Whatever business you have, it ends here. But the old man wasn't finished. He waved a crumpled paper in the air. I've got proof you owe me something, Lord Hale. You see, this marriage wasn't just charity, it was payment. You promised my family a monthly allowance in exchange for her hand. I haven't seen a penny of it since last winter. Ilara's face burned with humiliation. She turned toward Adrian, but his gaze was calm, unwavering. That agreement was nullified when you signed the deed clearing your debt, Adrian said firmly. You sold your daughter into peace and now you come to disturb it. You'll get nothing more from this house, her father's voice rose. You think she's worth your name? She's a scarred beggar's daughter. The moment the insult left his mouth, Ilara stepped forward. Her voice, soft but clear, carried through the square. That's enough. The crowd fell silent. Even her father seemed stunned by the steadiness in her tone. You may call me what you wish, she said, but you will not speak that way to my husband or about this family. You lost the right to claim me the day you sold me. Her father's face darkened. You ungrateful. Before he could finish, Adrian's hand was on his shoulder, his expression cold as iron. Leave, he said, his voice low. If you value your life and your dignity, you will never return. The man looked between them, the proud lord and the daughter who no longer cowered, and for the first time, he faltered. Spitting at the ground, he turned and stumbled toward his carriage. As the wheels rolled away, Ilara stood trembling, the tension finally breaking inside her. Adrian stepped closer, his arm finding her shoulders. You did not need me to protect you, he said quietly. You did that yourself. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not of fear, they were of strength. I learned from you, she whispered. And from love, he smiled faintly. Then let him be gone and let this be your home forever. And as the sun dipped below the hills, Ilara knew it was over. The ghosts of her past had finally been driven away, and she had stood tall through it all. Winter wrapped the land in silence, a soft hush of snow blanketing Hale Manor and the surrounding hills. Inside, the great hearth glowed warm, casting golden light across the walls and the people who had made this house a home. Ilara stood by the window, gazing at the flakes drifting past the glass. Her reflection no longer startled her. The faint scars on her cheek, once a source of shame, had faded into something else entirely, a testament to survival, to everything she had endured and overcome. Behind her, she heard Adrian's quiet footsteps. You've been standing there a long time, he said, his voice low and warm. She turned to face him with a smile. I was just thinking how strange it feels to be happy. He walked toward her, his eyes soft with affection. Strange? She nodded. For so long I thought happiness was something borrowed, something that could be taken away at any moment. But now, it feels real. Adrian reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It is real, Ilara. You made it so. She laughed softly, remembering the frightened bride who once hid her face beneath a veil. That day felt like a lifetime ago. Do you remember our wedding? She asked, her voice a mixture of humor and nostalgia. How could I forget? He said. You wouldn't look at me. Her cheeks flushed. I was terrified. I thought you'd see the scars and regret everything. Adrian smiled, that slow, steady smile that had become her anchor. I saw them, he said. And I saw the woman who carried them with grace. That was the moment I knew I'd spend my life loving you. Her breath caught in her throat. Even after all they had shared, his words still had the power to undo her. He reached behind him and held out something small, a delicate silver mirror, framed in intricate filigree. This belonged to my mother, he said softly. She used to say that a woman should never fear her reflection, because beauty lives in truth, not perfection. Ilara took the mirror in trembling hands. For a moment she hesitated to look, but then she lifted it and met her own gaze. The woman staring back wasn't the broken girl she once saw. Her eyes were steady, her smile sure. Thank you, she whispered. He shook his head gently. Don't thank me. You found your courage long before I ever met you. I only helped you remember it. Outside, the wind howled softly, carrying the scent of pine and snow. The manor's halls echoed with laughter. The servants, the stable boy, even the cook who now treated Ilara like family. Life had returned to the once quiet estate. Later that evening, as the two sat by the fire, Ilara leaned her head against Adrian's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The crackling fire and the beating of their hearts said everything that needed to be said. After a while, Alara murmured, "Do you ever wonder what people think of us? The Lord and his scarred bride?" Adrian's hand tightened around hers. "Let them think what they will," he said simply. "They see a scar. I see the woman who saved me." She looked up at him, puzzled. "Saved you?" He smiled faintly. "Before you came, this house was just walls and silence. You brought life back to it, to me. You reminded me that love isn't something we find perfect. It's something we build, flaw by flaw, day by day." Ilara's eyes shimmered with tears. "Then we built something beautiful, didn't we?" He nodded. "More beautiful than anything I could have dreamed." The fire burned low, casting its last embers into the dark. Alara lifted her hand to touch his cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you still think I'm beautiful?" He looked at her for a long, tender moment, his gaze filled with love that words could barely hold. "No," he said softly. "I know you are." And as the snow fell outside, the veil that had once hidden her was gone forever, replaced by the quiet, radiant truth of a heart that had finally found home.